Is Grady Jarrett untouchable? And is there a higher probability of a Kirk Cousins trade than we previously thought?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com. RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you have to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today we are going to be joined by Josh Kendall of The Athletic to talk all about the Falcons offseason. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Josh Kendall right now. Welcome back to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, where we are joined by an illustrious guest. He is Josh Kendall, who covers the Falcons and does other things for The Athletic. And Josh is here with us, making his triumphant return to the podcast to talk all about the Falcons offseason. And you guys have heard from me over the last month or two, but it's fine time to get someone else's thoughts on some of these topics. But Josh, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Our little break is over now. It's combine and draft, and here we go.
Yeah. So, Josh, I've been very clear for the last 2 months on this podcast that I expect the Falcons to cut Kirk Cousins with a post-June 1 designation when March rolls around, before that March 16th roster bonus is due. What are your thoughts on the fate of Kirk Cousins this offseason?
I'm in what I guess is a dwindling camp of people who still thinks that they might be able to trade him. I'm not suggesting they get anything of real value in return other than they get a little less egg on their face and it helps in the dead cap consideration slightly versus a release situation where you do 40. I mean, I guess it helps a decent amount, actually, if you, depending on how you break it down, whether you break it down over 1 year or 2 years. I think that there are enough teams that need quarterbacks. I think there are few enough quarterbacks who are considered first round available in the draft that I think that there's a possibility that they can get a deal done with somebody. But yes, barring that, I think that they cut him. I do not think there's a scenario where he's a $40 million backup quarterback next year, especially if there was any hope of that. I think, that bridge was torched on Super Bowl week when I think the Falcons felt blindsided by Kirk going around New Orleans talking about how, as a matter of fact, he had been injured all season, despite everyone's contention that he was not.
Yeah. So, I think there is a possibility that they trade him. I just think it's a very, very, very low possibility. I guess if you could put a number on it, what would you put that number at in terms of likelihood of a trade development?
I mean, I still think that that's 50-50. I just think that he can make. And I wonder, I'm not saying this. I'm saying I wonder this. I wonder if part of his sort of mini media campaign at Super Bowl week was him saying, I can explain all that by I was hurt. I'm still the guy that you saw in Minnesota for a few years. I'm 2 years now. I will be 2 years now off of the Achilles injury. I'm going to give you some hope that I can return to middle of the pack, quarterback play in the league. So, and I think we've just seen this league. I mean, the Falcons have seen it, just saw it with this guy 12 months ago. This league is desperate for quarterbacks, and rationality tends to lose out in these arguments. When push comes to shove, NFL teams will talk themselves into doing stuff that we might not understand to acquire a quarterback. So I think that there are enough teams out there who will say, yeah, we know the Falcons are going to cut this guy if we bide our time. Well, why don't we send them a 6th round pick and take all the guesswork out of it? I think the Falcons will have to and will be willing to pick up some of his salary. So I think the Falcons can make this a palatable deal for somebody to then not have to get into the free agent market with Kirk Cousins.
Fair enough. You wrote something the other day about the untouchability of Grady Jarrett. It seemed a little passive aggressive, Josh, but maybe you can explain it a little.
I genuinely didn't mean for it to be passive aggressive. For me, that's a huge question. The Athletic, we wrote on the Athletic, we all submitted, a one cut candidate, one salary cap casualty for our team. And I put David Onyemata because I just couldn't get myself to the point of saying the Falcons are going to release Grady Jarrett. The numbers, if you release David Onyemata, you take about an $8 million cap hit and you save $8 million. You got about $8 million dead money and you save about $8 million. If you release Grady, you have a $4 million dead cap hit and you save $16 million. So releasing Grady is, financially the better move. I just can't. And Grady will be entering his 11th year as a defensive lineman. He's on the wrong side of 30. He did not have his best year last year, although he played pretty well. But I'm just saying you can see arguments for releasing Grady Jarrett. I don't think they're going to do it, but I'm interested. We will pose that question to Raheem Morris / Terry Fontenot next week in Indianapolis.
Okay. So, you put David Onyemata as a cut candidate. Are there any other guys that you feel strongly one way or the other that maybe wind up, having played their last days in Atlanta?
Oh, man, I think that's a pretty long list. I mean, I think, Matt Judon, that's not a surprise. I think Lorenzo Carter could be on that list. I think that Dee Alford and Mike Hughes could be on that list. James Smith-Williams, we hardly knew you. Even though, I wouldn't be surprised if he came back. There's just a bunch of guys. I circled Grady on the thing because he's the he's the only one that I think Falcons fans would be like, oh no, they would feel a twinge of more than a twinge in Grady's case. But as the average Falcons fan, they lose David Onyemata. I like David, but the average Falcons fan is going to be like, okay, he was fine for a couple of years. They're not going to think about it the next day. Lorenzo Carter, they're going to be like, that guy's a damn good dog, but we're okay. They're not going to think about it the next day. For me, Grady is the only one that's like looms as a real decision. And what do you think about Grady? Do you think that Grady Jarrett's untouchable?
I mean, in my heart, I think he is untouchable.
Right.
It's kind of what you're saying, which is I was talking about this yesterday on the podcast, where it's like you can make a pretty compelling case for the Falcons to cut Grady Jarrett, given the cap savings, given all the talent available at defensive tackle in this year's draft, the investments the Falcons have made in the previous offseason. So there's a lot of reasons to decide to part ways with Grady Jarrett at this stage in his career. But at the same time, for sentimental reasons, and I still think he's playing good football, but just not the same level that he used to. You want to keep him around for at least one more year. See how it works.
I think so too. I think you should keep him. And I think that, when I can remember Arthur Smith, and this is Arthur Smith, so he's not around. I understand that. But I can remember Arthur Smith saying when they signed Chris and Grady these big extensions, saying, you want to reward the people who are doing it the right way in your locker room. That's how you want to run an organization. So can you do that 24 months ago and then release the same guy? I mean, the Falcons drive their fans nuts, I think, by ping-ponging between strategies. And that would be the ultimate, I think, like Grady Jarrett's our future because he's an Atlanta Falcon. And now it's Grady Jarrett's gone because we're jerking the wheel into the other lane. We're jerking the car into the other lane.
Yeah. Yeah. I've said before, like with Raheem being the head coach, with Jeff Ulbrich coming back, I think Grady has more than enough fans in the building that they'll probably keep him. But if, we'll see. We'll see. But you mentioned a couple of guys there that are on the outs that are impending free agents, but one such player that is an impending free agent that is a priority re-signed by all accounts is Drew Dalman, and he'll have a robust market. And we'll pick Josh's brain on what he thinks is next for Drew Dalman. Will he be playing in a Falcons uniform? We'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting, wondering, and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who's going to give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get those real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, and everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So here with Josh Kendall of The Athletic and talking about Drew Dalman, who is an impending free agent. Many people consider him the top center on the market. I've seen a lot of rumors with the Bears being one of these teams that are going to invest significantly in their offensive line. They're being connected to Drew Dalman. They're being connected to Trey Smith of the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm curious, Josh, what are your thoughts on the chances that Drew Dalman has played his last snap in Atlanta?
I don't think it's high. I think that if I'm moving that lever, I'm leaning the needle toward he stays with the Falcons. I just think it makes too much sense for both sides. Drew Dalman's a good player, but I don't think that Drew Dalman is a great player. I think Drew Dalman has more value in the middle of Atlanta's offensive line, where he's played with those guys and he's played for Dwayne Ledford for 4 years, than he does just as a standalone guy, if that makes any sense. This is not Zach Martin. I'm going to pull Zach Martin's name out of a hat. Zach Martin's going to be just as good at guard, wherever he goes, as he was with the Dallas Cowboys or whoever. I don't think the same is true for Drew Dalman. He doesn't strike me as a guy who is going to, sort of treat the free agency process like college recruiting and want to necessarily be wooed and wowed. I think that all those 5 starters in Atlanta find real strength in that unit. Really like playing for Dwayne Ledford. I think Drew will be incentivized to come back. And from the same token, the Falcons really value that cohesion, and I believe will step up to the plate and pay Drew Dalman what he needs to be paid. Ryan Newsel can do the job, but I think the run game. I think that the run game was better with Drew. I think that's important to Atlanta. I think they'll get the deal done.
Yeah. It feels like Newsel is your emergency option, not necessarily your go-to option.
And a good emergency option. I think that they legitimately felt like, we could be in a lot worse shape with our starting center out than to have Ryan Newsel. But I do think they want Drew Dalman back.
Now, a player that is not yet a free agent, but a lot of talk about him being on the trade block, is Kyle Pitts. What do you think will happen with Kyle Pitts this offseason?
I mean, who's trading for Kyle Pitts? That's my question. I mean, I don't know what anybody's going to offer you for Kyle Pitts, because you just wait a year and wait for him to be on the open market. Because I think that the Falcons were right to pick up his 5th-year option because it's cheap at the tight end price. You buy yourself another year to hope that something comes of it. But if you're on the outside looking in, I don't know what you offer Atlanta that makes it worth their while. Try one more time to unlock this thing and make it work. And then if it doesn't, we'll see what the market brings. And maybe he's back in Atlanta at a deal that he doesn't, nobody was expected as his second contract, and maybe he's somewhere else. But I'm out of the, I'm not focusing on Kyle Pitts anymore. Kyle Pitts is Atlanta's starting tight end. He's a fine player, but I've removed him from the category of we have to talk about this guy all the time because if they can just unlock him, it will be X, Y, and Z, or it's this or it's that. I mean, he's just, he and Charlie Warner are irreplaceable, are interchangeable in my mind. I don't think that he's any more value to Atlanta than Charlie Warner. So I'm not gonna talk. I'm not doing this Kyle Pitts thing anymore. That's what I'm just not. I'm not.
Okay.
He's entering the final year of his Falcons contract. He's a fine player. That's it.
Okay. I'll make that note that I will never talk to you about Kyle Pitts ever again. So, okay.
And I'm sure, of course, I will talk about Kyle Pitts all season. I understand that, but I'm just saying right now, this is my frame of mind.
I understand. You're trying to cut the cord on that. I get you.
Right.
A couple other guys that are potential cut candidates, Younghoe Koo, Caleb McGarry, Jake Matthews. Do you see anything happening with any of those guys this offseason?
It wouldn't surprise me if they cut Younghoe Koo. It's not a big savings, but it is some savings. And you could try to bring him back at a smaller number, or you could get another guy. I think Younghoe Koo is a good kicker, but the life of a kicker this is kind of the life of a kicker in the NFL. You could go out and fight. There's always a dozen guys out kicking on high school fields, waiting to try to take your job, which is what Younghoe did 4 or 5 years ago. You bring a guy in who's hitting the ball well, he gets a little confidence, he's your Younghoe Koo for 2 or 3 years. That could absolutely happen here or anywhere else. Your Younghoe Koo could be Younghoe Koo. I mean, he could get his form back and get his confidence back and be just fine. But I think that I'm not going to be surprised if they cut him, simply because there are always lots of options at kickers, and he really struggled to end the second half of the season.
And that offensive line position, Caleb McGarry, Jake Matthews, are they going to be back, run it back?
I think so. I mean, I think that, Jake Matthews is the offense is Grady Jarrett, although less heralded. I thought somehow Grady Jarrett is more, the quintessential Falcon than Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews has been remarkably anonymous for a guy who is, starting 160, what are we at, 170 straight games at left tackle, a former first-round pick, just a really good player. He still gets lost in the shuffle somehow, but I don't think in that building he does. I'd be shocked if they made a move there. And Caleb is Caleb. Caleb is a guy who frustrates Falcons fans to no end, but, every right tackle in the league, bothers the crap out of their fan base. So I don't know that the Falcons are thinking, yeah, we can make a huge upgrade. We can make a huge upgrade there. If something happens, something weird happens at 15, maybe this is going to change. I'm going to try not to be hypocritical and kill any team if they take an offensive tackle at 15. It's not the pick that makes sense for Atlanta this year, but if they love one of those guys and they fall, because there are a lot of tackles in the first round, and they fall to 15 and they say, we can't let that guy go because we think he can battle Caleb this year and start at one of those positions for the next 10 years, then maybe you take him. And I changed my mind about what they do with Caleb. But right now, I think they resign Dalman and run it back everywhere up there.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the draft, and it sounds like you are in the same place of mind that I think myself and probably 99% of Falcon fans are, which is they have to take a pass rusher in round 1. But we'll get into that conversation here with Josh Kendall as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And with the Hawks coming up off the All-Star break, their first action to make their playoff push in the back half of this NBA season against the Orlando Magic on Thursday, if you're going to do a same game parlay, why not, bet on who's going to get that first bucket, how many points Trae Young is going to have, and who's going to be leading at halftime. It's all available for you at FanDuel, and new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Josh, as I said, it feels like, I'm listening to podcasts talk about the Falcons and their who they're going to take in round one on their mock draft shows, and they're like, it's becoming a running joke of mocking the Falcons a pass rusher in round one, and then their refusal to take a pass rusher in round one.
That's what we do.
And so I feel like this year they can't let the joke continue. Like, they have to take a pass rusher. Like, it feels like they have to do that, right? But like, knowing the Falcons, you can't put any stock in that, right?
We've thought that before, certainly. So I'm not gonna. I would have bet almost anything that they were going to take a pass rusher last year, and here we are. Michael Penix is your starting quarterback. Who would have seen that coming? So no, I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna assume they have to do it this year. Although I think that they will do it. There are a lot of tackles. We just talked about that, but there are enough guys that you can squint your eyes and think that could be an elite-ish edge rusher that are going to be available around. Looks like they're going to be available around 15. That I think Atlanta has to take one of those guys. I know Falcons fans will be skeptical of this too, but I could see him with Landon Michael Williams out of Georgia. I think that's a good fit. But I feel like it has to be this year, just like everybody else, but who knows?
Yeah, I know that feeling, Josh. I know that feeling. But, is there any, you got a couple of Georgia guys in Jalen Walker and Mikel Williams. Is there anybody that you're going to be keeping your eye on next week in Indianapolis at the Combine that you're like, this guy could be a Falcon?
Well, I think all of those edge rushers. I think that Shamar Stewart for me is a guy who scares me a little bit, but boy, he's physically talented, and I think he's gonna shine at the Combine. He's not an edge. He's not a 3-4 edge. At least his body type is not a 3-4 edge. He's more of a 4-3 down end guy. But Jeff Ulbrich talked really sincerely when he was hired about saying we need to create something. We need to be open to creating something that is different than the structure of what we've always played, because, we've got to be ready. We've got to be more malleable than we were when Raheem and I were here the first time with this defense. So if you think Shamar Stewart just jumps off the page, and you say we've got to find a way to place to play him and a way to make that work, he could be that type of guy. He's the type of guy who scares me because he's super high athleticism and really pretty low, at least sack production. He led Texas A&M in pressures last year. I give him some credit for that, but not a ton of sacks throughout his career. So those are the guys that scare me, because you feel, if you spent much time around the Falcons, you feel like every time they roll those particular dice, they come up on the wrong side of that. But if you come up on the right side of that, that guy could be a day one difference maker.
Yeah. I think people probably the go-to in terms of the guy that wasn't a super productive player in college, but was very physically gifted, is Danielle Hunter, that turned into a stud pass rusher in the NFL. And obviously the Falcons, rumors were that the Falcons had interest in signing him last offseason. So, in that frame of mind, maybe the Falcons sort of could see a guy like Shamar Stewart as a sort of the next Danielle Hunter, but we'll see on that front. Before we get to the draft, obviously free agency happens. And if you could say, put it on a scale of 1 to 10, how proactive do you think the Falcons will be in that first week of free agency, trying to upgrade their roster, particularly on the defensive side of the ball?
I think that they're going to be pretty aggressive trying to get a cornerback. I think that there are some quality cornerbacks who are older, who are veterans, but not, all the way over the hill. So I think that they'll get a cornerback, and I think that they could get an edge rusher. I think that there are things that they can do to move some money around and play salary cap magic to get some room. So, a guy like Malcolm Kuntz, edge rusher, that level of free agency, I could see them landing there, and there'll be enough cornerbacks that you're not going to have to pay top dollar. Charvarius Ward is a guy who's looks like he's on his way out in San Francisco. Good player, probably at this point not a huge contract guy, but I think the Falcons will be aggressive because I think that Terry Fontenot's entering year 5 and has mentioned that this is a critical offseason for him. Arthur Blank has approached the last few years like he wants to, be involved, push all of his or most of his chips to the end of the middle of the table. So I do think they'll be aggressive. I don't think they'll be the splashiest team by far, but I think they'll add defensively.
Okay. Any sort of bold predictions, some surprises that, people need to keep their eye on coming this offseason for the Falcons in your eyes?
No, I mean, I think, I guess people are going to be surprised if they find a trade partner for Cousins. I'm not, as we discussed to open this thing, I still think that could happen. But if you're thinking that that's not a possibility at all, that could be your offseason surprise. I think that it gets something done, not something exciting, but something.
Okay. Well, Josh, I appreciate you coming in, sharing your insights on this upcoming Falcons offseason. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on next week in Indianapolis at the Combine, and then shortly thereafter, free agency kickoff. So a busy couple of weeks for you coming up, and the rest of us covering this team and the rest of this league. But go ahead, plug where people can find your stuff and if anything you're currently working on.
Let's see, everything at The Athletic, obviously. We've got a big mock draft coming out. All the beat writers, we did a sort of a live mock draft. That'll be out later this week. We'll do a Falcons mailbag. It'll be available this weekend, first of the week, and then it'll be all in from Combine and, all, put our foot down on the draft. So everything will be at theathletic.com. There
you go. Josh, always appreciate you coming on. Look forward to seeing what moves the Falcons make, see if any of these predictions or bold guesses come true. And then we'll have to revisit this closer to draft time to see if it does feel like the Falcons are on track to do the thing that they never do, which is take the pass rusher in round 1. So I look forward to that conversation.
Thanks, Aaron.
So tomorrow, guys, we will be talking about the implications of the salary cap change. We'll with the projection being is going to be like $5 million more than we thought. So we'll see, what that means for the Falcons salary cap circumstances, and we'll see what else is on the deck for tomorrow's episode. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check out Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, as well as the other host of shows. Check out, Locked On Hawks to get you geared up for their upcoming action. Locked On Bulldogs, Locked On Braves. Baseball season's just right around the corner. So it's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.